Good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody this morning. Hope that you've had a good week, and look forward to another one. We started a lesson last Sunday. I want to finish it up today, and just kind of gave it several different titles, I guess. Evidence of spiritual growth in ourselves personally is basically, I guess, about as good a title as any. Growing a relationship with God would be a title descriptive of what we're talking about. But we're just looking at different ideas. And I guess Roger will be back by tomorrow, and so he'll be back in here Sunday morning. Well, let's have a prayer and then we'll get started. Father, we're aware as we begin our day that you provided all the blessings that's necessary for our life and well-being, and you provided for us the greatest blessing of all, and that is salvation and all the great blessings that are a part of that. We know you've done it through Jesus, and we're thankful for that, and you've made possible a source of information from you, your revelation of your will to us, and we're grateful for some time to study together. Help us to dig a little deeper as we study and deepen our understanding of you and how this material relates to our lives, and use it in our lives and be able to share it with others. And through Jesus we pray. Amen. I'll just use the title, Evidence of Spiritual Growth. Evidence made up of several different things. Last Sunday, we talked about two things. One was a growing hunger to know God. That's something we start with as a Christian, but we feed it daily through the study of His Word and meditating on it and using it in our lives. And as a result, it will produce more growth, more hunger. And as we live our lives, whether we're 50-year-old Christian or older, we find that desire to know Him, to continue to deepen our knowledge, something that grows within us. And then we talked about a growing desire to know His truths. And we're talking about some things that overlap, but you and I, we want to grow and go out with a heart full of gratitude for what He's done for us, and a great deepening continuously of our knowledge of Him, of our faith. And so today we want to start out with a greater sensitivity to sin and evil. That's kind of a strange subject. It sounds awfully negative, but it's really not that way. I hope as we approach it, I hope I don't approach it that way. But a greater sensitivity to sin and evil. Now, before we really get into that, think about desensitization, being desensitized. I remember some years ago, I was made aware, I don't remember if our TV broke or what happened, but we didn't have one. Maybe we decided to do without it. I can't remember exactly what the deal was. But it wasn't just a day or two that I began to realize that, having been watching it without realizing it, there was a certain amount of desensitization that I was experiencing. Because of what we see on TV, and of course back even a few years ago, it was not as bad as it is now. But we get desensitized to, okay, so somebody got shot last night. Don't think about it very much. We see, in 30 minutes we see umpteen people killed, and finally the bad guy gets caught, and he may get shot. And so we see so much of that. And then there's the various forms of immorality on TV. Great desensitization can take place there. After we got another TV, we've tried to really be selective of what we watch. And I suspect, though, right now, even with being selective of what we watch, I suspect what we do see, whether it's in a commercial or what, that's maybe having more influence on me than I was aware of. So as I was developing this, I was looking at this material, and I was thinking about this kind of thing. You and I want to go out strong. Strong in our love, strong in our faith, strong in our surrender, strong in our obedience. And all the things going on around us in our culture is going to have an effect on that. A spiritual growth enables, an ongoing spiritual growth, enables a person to be very, very discerning between good and evil. Recognize sin and abhor all that's evil. Look at Romans chapter 12 for just a moment, verse 9. Romans chapter 12 and verse 9. Now, he started out, before we get down to verse 9, the background of this, notice what he says. Verse 1. I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. Worship me every day. Spiritual service of worship is made up of what? Well, he says it's to present our bodies a living and holy sacrifice. Now, if I present my body as a living and holy sacrifice to God, that's inclusive of everything that I am. My intellect, my emotions, my conscience, the whole, everything makes up the heart. And then he says, and don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Now, I know that our assembly here today is a special time for worship. We can find evidence of what those early Christians did when they assembled on the first day of the week. Preaching, teaching was part of it. Communion was part of it. Their prayers together, their songs together, all that kind of thing. It's not exactly everything that we do every day. But verse 1 says we worship every day by presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice to God. Every day. AZ gets on that bulldozer. He's going to be the best he can be for God today. Or wherever else I work, or whatever else I'm doing. I'm going to be the best retiree for God every day, if that's the case. And I'm guiding my life that day out of what I've studied in the Bible, what I'm trying to apply to my life, so that every day I'm offering to God everything about me. Now he says in verse 2, when we do this, he said, you do this, but don't be. You do this, but you don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. Now, conform means what? Pardon me?
Follow a pattern.
Follow a pattern. You pour hot lead into a certain form, and when it cools down, it takes that form. He said, don't let the world put you in its mold and mold you like the world. He's talking to Christians now. But instead of that, you be transformed. what comes to mind when you think of transformation? And by the way, we'll get into verse 9 there in just a moment for our class. What does it mean to be transformed? What comes to your mind? I'm sorry? A butterfly. That word, as I understand it from the Greek scholars, is a metamorphosis. You know, the ugly worm in the cocoon comes out that beautiful butterfly. A different being, different kind of being. Here these people were, just like they today and all the years in between, different kinds of problems exist in our life, but we're all sinners, living, following the world's pattern, being conformed to it. And now we become Christians, and now he says, you offer yourself to God as a living sacrifice, and you don't be allowing the world to put you in its mold and make you like the world in its thinking, in its values, in its principles that it follows, but you be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now drop down to verse 9, and we see part of that transformation. He said, let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to that which is good. Abhor evil, cling to good. If I don't abhor evil and cling to good, will I be able to love without hypocrisy? That's all in the same text, all in the same verse. Not talking about two completely different ideas. Let love be genuine. Let it be sincere. Actually hate sin. Abhor evil. How do you say it? Abhor evil. Cling to what's good. Out of that understanding, out of that relationship, out of that concept comes can come a genuine love. Abhor. What comes to mind when you think of abhor? Hate it. Cling to what's good. Now, what does that depend on? For me to abhor evil and cling to good, what does that depend on? Depends on discerning, doesn't it? Picking out. This is evil. Yeah, I see that. This is good. Yeah, I see that. We can discern between the two. We'll talk a little bit more about that in another point in just a moment. Shudder at evil. Cling to what's good. Be able to see the difference and make the choice. Along with that verse, 1 Thessalonians 5:22 says, abstain from evil. Abstain from every form of evil. Now that you're Christians. Well, it'd be good if everybody did that, Christian or not. But there's an expectation that we have of each other as Christians. There are certain things that we expect from each other, and there are things that we don't expect from each other. Now, if there's something out there that takes on the form of evil, you don't expect to see me there with it. There's a lot of things that apparently today, and have always been, there are certain things seem like that's not looked upon as a form of evil. During the week, and probably people disagree. Some may disagree with me. I know some do in other places. I don't know about here. But if you scream fire in a casino, everybody pour out of it, and some of them probably wearing the name Christian. Same way with the occasional drink of alcohol. Think about the influence. Think about the long-term effect on oneself. I remember reading about a lady who had one beer every afternoon. She grew old, always having one beer every afternoon. Somebody challenged her that she's addicted to that. She said, no, I'm not. You just have one. She said, okay, go without it, skip it. See how it affects you. She found out she was addicted to it. One. Had a fellow tell me one time, I was studying with him. We'd gone through Romans 6, and he saw the union with Christ, baptism. And he was counting the cost. He was sitting there, he said, you know, especially on summer times, I like to have a cold beer. I don't know how many times a day, maybe once, maybe whatever. He said, am I going to have to quit that? I said, well, let me ask you. Suppose I come over here in the afternoon, we do our, before we study, you say, I'm going to have a beer. Would you like to have one? And if I said, yeah, I believe I will, what would you think? He just shook his head and said, I got to quit it. He understood. Discerning between what's best for him. It could be between good and evil, but it also can be what's better and what's best. This is good, but this is better. In Hebrews chapter 5, let's read that together. 5 and 14. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 14. Let's back up to about 12. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles of the oracles of God. And you've come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he's a babe. Now notice interchangeably, he equates solid food with the word of righteousness. Digging deeper. Going on in our obedience to becoming more and more and more like Jesus. Verse 14. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. The quality of maturity in verse 14. The way he identifies it in verse 14 is this. But solid food is for the mature. Who are the mature? Those who become, because of practice, have their senses trained to discern good and evil. So these folks, by practice, are able more and more to distinguish between good and evil. Those are the mature. Those are the ones who can receive the word of righteousness. They've gone beyond just getting into Christianity. They're growing spiritually. And they're using what they're learning in their life. And he says, these people are practicing. They, because of practice, are having their senses are trained to discern good and evil. The more you and I look at a situation and say, okay, this is good, but this is better, or this is wrong and this is right, and we choose the correct choice, the more that happens, the more capable we are of making that decision. And as a result, the more ability we have to just recognize what's good and what's not. It's possible for something to be acceptable for me to do. But if I do it, the awareness of other people that I'm doing it because of maybe their newness as a Christian, haven't progressed, to a greater level of maturity, it may cause them to stumble. So what do? I give up my right in the interest of other people. Thoughts you want to share before we go further? Pardon me? Constant practice? Constant practice, yeah. Doing it all the time. the teaching of righteousness. You know, there's two concepts I think that we can talk about if we talk about righteousness. First of all, Romans chapter 3, starting about verse 21, other places, Paul talks about acquiring, becoming, being declared righteous by God. Now that happens through a deep faith in Christ. Now I'm not talking about just a faith in certain facts about Jesus. I'm talking about a faith in which I recognize what he's done for me and I come to him to get the benefit of what he's done for me. I trust him. I entrust myself to him. Righteousness. When that person has been united to Jesus' death and resurrection, he receives the benefits of all that Jesus accomplished in that death and resurrection. I don't accomplish anything. He does it, and I come to him to receive it. When that happens, I stand there united to him. I'm dripping wet. I haven't even gotten out of the baptistry or out of the pond or wherever it is I was baptized. And he has declared me righteous. Now that's a position before God. It's a position. In spite of my weaknesses and in spite of the disobedience to him at times, I can still hold that position. Why? Well, that's a good question to you. Why? Why can I still hold that position? I'm guilty. Well, I am united to him in his new life. That new life means that he is a living sacrifice in heaven, still accomplishing for you and me what he accomplished initially on the cross. His blood's cleansing us. I confess it to him. Father, I blew it. Here's what I did. I need your forgiveness. Granted. I can continue to be forgiven. That's what allows me to hold continuously that position before God of righteousness. Now, there's another concept of righteousness, which is the practical aspect of it. And that's where he's expecting you and me to take what he's done for us and use it to follow a life of sanctification, which means that we're trying to grow into the image of Jesus. It's being transformed, our lives, becoming more like Jesus. That's practical righteousness. That's where you and I fail. That's what would destroy our position before God if it were not for his forgiveness possible through Christ Jesus. Righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. But there's another group of people he's talking about here, and he says, 13, verse 13, everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he's a babe. They have a hard time discerning between good and evil. But this person who's been receiving the deeper teaching of righteousness, how to live righteous before God, that person is one who's been practicing the distinction between good and evil and making the right choice. So, what we're talking about is this great desire to know that difference between good and evil. Let me see. Seems like I missed something. No, okay. So we're talking about a greater sensitivity to sin and evil. Sometimes, have you ever been around Christians that, the conversation is about what I used to do, and I used to do this, and I used to do that, and so forth, and everybody's laughing about it and having a good time, seem like talking about it? You ever come away wondering, well, how do they feel about what they used to do? How do they feel about where they came from? I mean, they've stepped into supposedly a union with Jesus in which life is to be lived growing into the image of Jesus. It sounds like they just had a good time back there and haven't given that up. I don't know. Talking about a greater sensitivity to good and evil. Any other thought before we move a little further? Number two this morning. A decreasing desire for the world's system. These all go hand in hand. If I'm developing a greater sensitivity to good and evil, then that means that my whole attitude toward the world around me is changing. A decreasing desire for the world's system. When the Bible talks about the world, what does the writer mean when he uses the term world? For example, in 1 John chapter 2, John says, don't love the world, nor the things that are in the world. What does he mean by world there? I mean, he's created a magnificent universe. At night, the beauty of the heavens. In the day, the beauty of now, the greenery. In the fall, all the beautiful colors. Is that what he's talking about? Don't love the world. What is he talking about when he uses the term world?
Sin.
Pardon me?
Sin.
Sin? Okay, that's certainly a part of it, isn't it? Anything else you want to add?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with who you associate with and things that you do during the day. Like when I leave here, I think oh no, I got to get back into the world instead of in my Christian community. So when you go out of the Christian community, to me, that's the world.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Outside the relationship with God. Yeah. That the world is it's where that sin dominates. It's where God is not the center in determining lifestyle, how I live. Does it include a way of thinking? Our world. One person defined the world this way, and I really like this definition myself. Human society, insofar as it is organized on wrong principles and characterized by base desires, false values, and egoism. Let me read that again. Human society, insofar as it's organized on wrong principles and characterized by base desires, false values, and egoism. I kind of feel like he touched most of the bases in that definition. It's a world that's under Satan's dominion. It's that lifestyle where God is not the center of it. The world. It's human life in which God isn't the center. There's a system involved with, when we use the term world, like world of sports, the world of politics, world of finance. You know, the world of politics, I don't know if I guess it's always been this way. But for a Christian to step into that world, boy, that's like stepping into a tornado. It's so different. It's so unacceptable in its principles and values and so forth to a Christian. A system. Behind the world of sports, there's a system that keeps it going. Behind the world of politics, there's a system that keeps it going. In this world that he's talking about here, there's a whole system different from the Christian system that keeps it going. He says, there are reasons not to love the world. Go back to chapter 2 of 1 John again. Let's go to verse 15. Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. I can't have this love of God and love of the world at the same time working together in my mind. He says, if it's the world I love, I can't be a lover of God. I can say I am, but I can't be that. They're so contradictory. They're so this way with each other. One goes in that direction and one goes in that direction. He says, verse 16, all that's in the world. Now you won't find anything there except these three categories. For all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but it's from the world. So, number one, if I love the world, I may claim to love God. I may go through the motions. I may even, on the outside, look like I do. But he says, love of the Father is not there. Because the love of the Father is not just, yeah, God's all right. I like him. Won't deny him that he exists. But love of the Father means I'm his child. And I'm going to live in a relationship to him. A right relationship to him. That's number one. Number two, he says, there's three things that's going to be characteristic of me if I love the world. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And we could talk about those this morning for a whole class or two, but we won't try to get too involved in that. What I see, what I desire in my fleshly being, and all that pride. And the first thing Jesus taught us in Matthew 16, if you're going to come after me, what's the first thing you have to do? What's the first principle? If you're going to follow me, if you're going to come after me,
Deny yourself.
deny yourself. Exactly. Pride of life. Deny yourself. That's a lifelong project, I found. But we get better and better as we go. And then, verse 17. The world is passing away and its lust, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. The world's temporary. So why should I really do everything within my power to get as much of it as I can? It's temporary. Not going to last. It's not going to make it possible for me to walk into heaven. There's nothing about it that's going to go beyond the grave. But he says, the love of God, what's it? Look at verse 17 again. But he who does the will of God abides forever. There's the permanency. So what are we talking about? Signs, evidences of spiritual growth. Decreasing desire for the world system. Now, how do I make this transition? I've lived in the world all my life. Somebody's come along, they've taught me. And now I'm become a Christian, received Jesus' salvation. Now I'm going to follow him. How is it that I can stop loving the world and start loving God, loving Jesus? He tells us, do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So, how do I bring that about in my life? How do I stop loving the world and start loving Christ? Study is going to be a very foundational thing. What else? Can't get anywhere without studying, learning of God, learning of his attitude towards sin, what he's done for me, how I get the benefit of it, how I live with Him. What else? Anything?
Open our eyes to see how horrible sin is
Yeah.
in and of itself. And that alone should make us want to get as far away. The most disgusting thing you can think of, you don't want to hear it, you don't want to be close to it. So to open our eyes and see what sin actually is, we don't want to get as far away from it as possible.
Okay. Open my eyes. See how decadent sin is. See the decay it causes me. I really believe in what you just said. That's so true. And I believe what she just mentioned is supposed to take place at the time I say to myself, yes, I want the salvation Jesus offers me. I know from what I've been studying how to receive that salvation. And now I'm going to go do it. And I surrender to that great event called baptism. A union with Him. Why? Because it's just like Glenda was saying, I want to get away from what previously has been my lifestyle. And I think if I entered Christianity without understanding that, I don't think I can have the spiritual growth that we're talking about. I need to know what sin is from my own experience. I need to realize what it's doing to me in terms of my relationship with God and what it's doing to me in terms of where I'm going to spend eternity. And say, I don't want that. I want to change my life. Other things. And the study that you just mentioned will help me begin to see what Glenda's talking about. Chris? Pardon me?
Certainly prayer.
Certainly prayer. Yeah.
Our associates, our things we do, our entertainment, there's three things that we have function about. Things we have to know.
Yeah. Probably will have to choose some new friends if I can't convert my old ones. Change my activities. Hey, I can't go do this anymore. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm going to become like Him. Yeah. You wouldn't find Him staggering out of a bar half drunk. You're not going to find Him throwing all of his money away at a stinking casino either, regardless of what anybody else says. I've got to quit that lying. I've been misleading people. I've been hurting people. So discerning between good and evil. And that comes more and more as we study. And a person who becomes a Christian is not going to just jump from 0 to 100, as a Christian. It's going to be a growing process. I've got to get into the Word, got to apply the Word, and as Chris said, got to pray about it. Father, I belong to you. I'm brand new in your family. I'm a babe. Help me so that I get protected from anything that would discourage me by throwing obstacles in my path, including my own thinking and my own decision making. And that's why it's so important to have that close, intimate fellowship of brothers and sisters. We can draw on that fellowship, and as we get to know each other, that becomes an encouragement to me. Well, I know these people don't do that. That's going to encourage me to stop doing it. Other things that come to mind. I think I heard a bell, didn't I, a while ago?
Yep.
Well, Hebrews 10:25 says that we've got to be here to have an association you just talked about. And need to be around those that have grown so far.
Yeah.
And where you started from.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying, is what you just said. So that's very important to me.
Yeah.
One of the most important things to be in worship service, you get to hear God's word and you get to be around those that would encourage you.
Yeah. That's correct. And AZ, one of the things seems like it's a way of thinking today. That, hey, I can become a Christian, but being a part of the assemblies, no big deal. Anyway, one last thought real quickly. 1 Corinthians 3:18. Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become a fool that he may become wise. And in that section, if you backed up a little earlier, he's talking about two wisdoms. Wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. And he says if somebody thinks he's really wise in this age, and different people can come to mind, but the scientist who seems to be so confident that there is no God and everything came about by evolution and all, he's being led by wisdom, world's wisdom. And if somebody happens to get to the point where they convert that person, then he moves from that world's wisdom over to God's wisdom. He begins to see the fallacies of his thinking and begins then to think God's way. Now, he moves then from the world's wisdom over here to God's wisdom. What are these people over here going to think about him? He's foolish. Who ever heard of a man on a cross doing me any good in life? Man, I want to live. I don't want to think about a dead man. There is no such a thing anyway. So this one over here, the world's wisdom, when he moves over to really be able to think and see clearly, these folks here are going to think he's very stupid. But the point's this: two wisdoms. The one wisdom, the world's wisdom, is what's behind the good and evil. God's wisdom, when we accept it, is what's behind discerning between good and evil and choosing the good. Okay. Roger will probably be here next Sunday, and I appreciate your attention, appreciate your input, and enjoyed studying with you the last couple of Sundays.